Hello and welcome into the third and final episode of the Getting to Know Headline Amp mini-series, where we really start to focus in on the benefits of Headline Amp. So in the previous two episodes, we broke down this premix to get a better understanding of what Headline Amp is, and we also got to know some of those characteristics that Headline Amp brings to the table, such as increased disease control, as well as those plant health benefits that we went into great detail about in the second episode. In this episode, we're going to tie all of those together and dive into what that means for you at the end of the day when you use Headline Amp. So if you've watched the previous two episodes of this mini-series, you're very familiar with this slide where we focus in on the three key aspects of what Headline Amp brings to the table in terms of not only disease control, but also those BASF plant health benefits such as increased growth efficiency and plant stress. So we're going to focus in now on what these all bring to the table in terms of your yield and the benefits that you see in the field. The first one that I want to focus in on, I believe, really encompasses all of these aspects in terms of what you see and the benefit that it provides in the field. So what I'm referring to here is simply just increased stalk integrity and increased standability at the end of the year. And this one's pretty self-explanatory. I feel that if you have a stronger, healthier, more robust crop as a whole, you're going to have a stronger, healthier, more robust stalk that is helping that crop stand longer in the field. And you can see a side-by-side there, just how much healthier that stalk is at the end of the year where we split them open. You can see that that tissue isn't nearly as affected by whether it be disease or just nutrients getting robbed from the stalk to help feed the ear or anything like that, all because of the other benefits that we provided to it throughout the year. And we can see that this translates into some very key benefits in the field as well, where we pulled this example from a field where there was a side-by-side, and you can see on the left, the untreated, really having some trouble standing there late in the year versus the Headline Amp treated portion of the field on the right, standing very tall and strong even late in the year. And oftentimes we get some very positive feedback from growers who utilize this product in terms of how good that stand is at the end of the year. I've even talked to people that said they don't really care if they see a yield benefit out of Headline Amp. They use it just because they have that increased confidence that it's going to be standing out there stronger at the end of the year. It can help handle that adverse weather, or even if it takes you a little bit longer to get out there and harvest that crop, it's still going to be standing. Let's switch over and focus in on what that increased disease control brings to the table. So this one also a little bit self-explanatory, but I think worth focusing in on. So this slide should also look familiar. This is something, a slide that we pulled from the second episode where we talked about the level of disease control specifically on tar spot that Headline Amp brings to the table. And this was from a study over in Indiana, but let's see how that correlated over to yield increase. So we saw that the Headline Amp did a really good job at controlling the tar spot, and this pretty readily correlated over to increased yield as well. Out of this trial, I believe Headline Amp was in the top 5 in terms of the highest yielding treatments. So that level of disease control pretty clearly resulted in a significant yield benefit there as well. When we look at a similar trial in Michigan, we again see that Headline Amp provided very quality control of tar spot in a very heavy tar spot area. And in this case, Headline Amp was tied with Moravis Neo for the second highest yielding treatment in this trial against some very key names in the corn fungicide world. Headline Amp did a very good job of not only controlling that disease, but also resulting in a good yield benefit as well. Now let's stay focused on the disease control, but switching away from tar spot and looking at disease control from a more holistic standpoint here. So I pulled a couple of different examples. The first one that you see here is from Carmi, Illinois in 2018. Now this is a trial that had very heavy disease pressure from a variety of different diseases, including southern rust and gray leaf spot, as well as northern corn leaf blight. And you can see that Headline Amp at a couple of different rates there provided a very clear benefit, anywhere from 10.3 to 10.8 bushels over that untreated. Now this was in a heavy disease area, so that shouldn't come as much of a surprise. But when we look at a similar trial a few hours north in Seymour, Illinois in that exact same year, this trial had very little disease that was present. But when we look at those Headline Amp treatments, we still see a very clear and noticeable yield benefit. This, I believe, relates back to the plant health benefits that Headline Amp provides even in the absence of disease, and shows why this can be a very helpful product even when you don't have heavy disease pressure. So I think that's a very good segue into that plant health conversation, and really starting to focus in on what those plant health characteristics provide in terms of a benefit at the end of the year. So I want to talk through a couple different examples. The first one that you see here is from the infamous drought year of 2012. This is a side-by-side picture from a field in Illinois where you can see on the left, the untreated is really struggling with that drought stress that's going on. You can see those corn leaves rolled up pretty tightly versus the Headline Amp treated portion of the field on the right, still looking very healthy. Not nearly having the negative response to the drought that you see from the picture on the left. Those leaves aren't rolled up nearly as bad. You can see that they're unfurled and catching that sunlight like we want them to. So a pretty noticeable benefit. And then we switch over to another in-field trial. In this instance, this field happened to get hail damage, but just so happened to be split with Headline Amp on the right versus untreated on the left. And you can see from the overhead imagery, the vegetation map and the NDVI imagery, that the Headline Amp portion of the field very, very different in a good way in terms of what we're seeing from that Headline Amp. Much more vegetation out there, much more healthy green tissue that we're seeing from that NDVI imagery. And when you look at the header on this graph, you can see that the Headline Amp portion of the field ended up being an additional 22 bushels to the acre, just because of the way that they was able to help with that response to that hail damage and the stress that was associated with it. Now I want to focus in a little bit more on the drought stress that we can see and how Headline Amp benefits from this. And we're going to walk through some really interesting work that was done a couple years ago in Colorado, where we really focused in on the benefits that Headline Amp can provide in some of these drought type scenarios. And you can see a quick snapshot of what this looks like as you got the untreated on the left, where that corn is really rolling up. You can even see some of that tissue starting to die off, versus the Headline Amp on the right still looks very healthy, still a lot of green tissue, very little of it starting to die off, and you can see that you don't have that same leaf rolling as well. So let's dive into a little bit more of the data and see what we were able to learn. So the work that was done here was basically done under 3 different drought scenarios, differing in level of severity. So all the way on the left, you see the no drought stress scenario, where Headline Amp over the untreated control provided a pretty significant benefit, right? From 209 bushels per acre up to 224. That's something that we'd all be very happy with. But you can really start to see that difference separate out even further as we start to introduce drought stress into this scenario. So I'm actually going to jump all the way to the far right, where we turn the irrigation off at VT, or that full tassel timing. Now we can see that that benefit from using Headline Amp is even more drastic because of the plant health benefits and allowing that crop to handle that stress in a more positive manner, or almost even ignore that stress to a certain extent. We can see the benefits of a Headline Amp start to become more drastic. Now when we get to the worst scenario there in the middle, the season-long drought stress, that starts to stretch out even more, all the way from 133 bushels per acre from the untreated control up to 222 bushels per acre in the Headline Amp treatment. So a very clear illustration of the benefits that Headline Amp and that plant health characteristics can really provide for you at the end of the year in terms of increased bushels. So when we tie it all together, I think the most important word that I can use to describe Headline Amp is consistency. And due to the benefits that we've talked about, or the different characteristics that Headline Amp brings to the table, this is a product that is going to perform very consistently across environments, whether it's high disease or low disease, or high yield or low yield. When you tie all of those characteristics and benefits together, this is something that you're going to have a lot of confidence in. And I pulled some data here from 2011 to 2017, so some older data, but still very relevant in terms of how Headline Amp performed across those years in a variety of trials against some of those similar type fungicides that fall into that mid-tier, that generation 2 class of fungicides, and you can see Headline Amp performed very well and very consistently across all these trials. Now, when we bring it a little more recently to some national trials from 2017 to 2021, the story continues, right? We see Headline Amp again against some of those same types of competitors, performing very consistently year over year and providing a very consistent benefit. And I think that all relates back to not only the increased disease control that we see, but also the plant health benefits and allowing that crop to respond more positively to the stresses that are out there. I think that really ties this product together and leads to, like I said, that level of consistency that we see year in and year out and across environments from Headline Amp. So here's some information for anybody that is interested in using Headline Amp. We saw some similar info in the first episode, but just wanted to throw some of this up there as kind of a reminder for some best use practices and some other information on Headline Amp. So I hope this information and this mini series was helpful and very informative for anybody that's interested in using Headline Amp and utilizing the benefits that it can bring to the table. I hope this was provided some value. So thank you all for tuning in and have a great year.